Hi everyone, it's Don and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Boy, we have some interesting developments on that cruise ship that sailed in Alaska. So if you remember, just over a week ago, a small cruise line called Uncruise set sail from Juneau, Alaska. It's its only port. It returns to Juneau, Alaska, as well as leaving from there, and it has an adventure cruise. It's a small cruise ship. It's made for people who want to get right up close to nature, get up close to bears and sea lions, and get right into the thick of the woods. There's hiking trails, there's kayaking, so it's a physical cruise. It's made for people who are really ready to go and rough it a little bit. Like they have, you're not going to have an 800 square foot suite on these ships. So yeah, it's set sail, and let's break down what happened. And then we have a real puzzling question at the end of this. So stay tuned for that. So wait till you hear the end of this. So the passenger took his test. This is the way the cruise line has it set up. You have to take a test before you before you head to the cruise. And the passenger took a test. He tested, or she tested, negative. Flew to Alaska, got on the ship on that day. When they arrive in the airport, they have to take another test. And this test is administered by the state of Alaska. It's not the cruise ship. It's not the passenger doing it. Everybody who flies into Alaska has to take this test. Trouble is, really, if you take that test, you should wait for the results before you go anywhere. Because what real good is taking that test until it's too late once you're already at your destination and possibly spreading things all over the place. So that's kind of what happened. The passenger got on board, passenger showing no signs whatsoever. They had their negative test. The cruise set sail. 3 days later, the passenger got notified that they had tested positive at the state test when they landed in Alaska. Immediately, they informed the crew. The crew immediately quarantined everybody and turned the ship around and headed back to Juneau. They canceled the cruise completely. And everybody was segregated. Everybody was on lockdown, including the crew members, and they re-administered the test. Well, it's been 9 days now since that happened. And since then, here's the kicker. All passengers and crew have tested negative, which is good news. That's great news, right? So it didn't spread to anybody else. It's not an outbreak. That's really, really good news. But not only that, the next test that the passenger who had tested positive tested negative. So a passenger, 5 days, tests negative. 5 days later, they test positive. 4 days later, they test negative again. So are you telling me in that amount of time, a passenger caught the virus and got rid of the virus in under basically a week and 2 days? It seems kind of strange to me. Now, the cruise line itself did not come out and say that that test was probably a false positive. And the person at the hospital administration that did the testing and everything said, look, we think that this was a correct diagnosis, and it's hard to tell. These tests are not foolproof, but they're pretty darn good, and they're pretty accurate. But in this case, it kind of looks like, well, it seems like such a short period, right, to me. I haven't caught anything, but anybody I've heard of catching it, it lasts for weeks, right? It doesn't just disappear. However, those are people who show a little bit of signs and a little bit of symptoms. If you're not showing any ill effects and you don't even notice that this has happened, then maybe you do shake it that fast. I'm not sure. But here's one of the big problems. Everybody on that ship now has left the state. They've flown back home, and including the passenger who had tested positive. And so the cruise line, Uncruise, has now canceled all its future cruises for all of 2020 on a possible false positive. It seems awful. It doesn't seem fair to me, right? It doesn't seem fair that this is kind of what happened, right? I know they were very distraught that a passenger, and a lot of people were down on them saying, how could you have sailed with that person on board without getting that test, without getting that statewide test? And that's true. You should. If you have a test at the state airport, the person should have to quarantine until the test comes in, and then you would set sail. So require the passenger to fly in 3 days ahead of time. If you can afford these cruises and you can afford this flight and everything, and you're willing to travel during this time, I'm quite sure almost every single person who was on this trip would have flown in for 3 more days and stayed at a hotel in Anchorage, Alaska. I don't think that would have been too big a problem. In fact, the majority, in fact, everybody else did that almost. So I don't think that's the problem. But I also find it very kind of unfair that this cruise line who had started up had one incident, and it's a very questionable incident now. It's very, did they really have a positive on board, or was this a bad test? And that is one of the things that makes the question, I don't know, how do you fix that, right? How do you go and say, well, you know, it might have been a positive, it might have been a negative, we don't know, but they ruined their whole rest of the year. You know, this cruise line could have been making a little bit of money. It could have been surviving. We could have been more tests of the water to show that this is working and things like that. And Alaska would, you know, not a whole lot of money out there for sure, but this cruise line, this money might be vital for that size of a cruise line. This money could have been, you know, people's jobs, people's livelihoods. And a false positive possibility, that kind of, so how do you fix that? How do you turn, you know, are we, you know, what happens now if we get, 1,100 people on a cruise ship and one passenger tests positive? Do we turn the whole ship around and send everybody back on the chance that it's a false positive now? Or do we hold that person in quarantine, isolate them in those rooms that they're supposed to have on the ships, and, you know, basically quarantine everybody from anybody else with fresh air supply and all that kind of thing, and then test them again and double check? I don't know. When you arrive at the airport and you take a test, maybe you take 2 tests, especially in a small airport like Alaska. You know, maybe the cruise line or the cruise passenger can fork up the $40 it takes to take these tests and just pay for an extra one. So that would, you know, if one comes back, both come back positive, then you're pretty darn sure that's what's going on. If one comes back positive and one comes back negative, then you really got a question on your hands. And it would probably throw an awful lot of questions into actual testing. Is testing reliable enough at the moment? And so that's one thing they probably would never do, because they don't want to throw that out there right now, because a lot of cruise lines that are starting up are looking at testing before people get on ships. Like MSC Cruise Line is looking at that right now. Hurtigruten Cruise Ship is now looking at that after what happened in Norway. And, you know, it's just, what do you do? I just feel sorry for Uncruise, because they seem to be following the rules. They let a passenger on a little too early, but then their whole season is gone because of possibly a false positive test. Did this person ever have the virus at all? They showed no signs of it. They have 2 out of 3 negative tests within 9 days of each other. It just seems like a darn shame. Well, let me know what you guys think. Do you think this was a false positive? It kind of looks that way, but no one will come out and say that. Even the cruise line won't come out and say that because they don't want to anger the Alaskan authorities, right? They don't want to anger the public health officials or the CDC or anybody and get them angry at them to shut them down even longer. So they're not going to complain about it. They're just going to keep quiet. But I'll pose that question out there. What do you guys think? Well, I hope you appreciate this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Want to see more tips, more tricks, more travel vlogs from around the world? Hit that subscribe button. Till next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.